I know many of you who watch television on Anzac Day are very familiar with the work and the presence of Dr. Monty Suta, who is our foremost Maori military historian and who has a passion for our military history. Following on from his successful book, Ngā Tamatoa, The Price of Citizenship, about the Māori Battalion C Company, he is currently working on a major publication about the Māori contributions to the First World War. So when I contacted him to see if he would be our keynote speaker, the timing seemed to be just right because he was doing his research about this area and World War I. He is a trained teacher, served in the NZSAS, holds a number of appointments on national boards and was honoured in this year's New Year's Honours List. I know that Monty has a reputation in the iwi of Ngāti Porou, but like me, he is from Ngāti Awa and Ngāti Porou, and that means we're doubly blessed. And we have fights with ourselves. But I don't wish to take up any more time. I do want to acknowledge that in the Playhouse Theatre is another audience, and we can't sort of holograph Monty in, that they will be watching him live on screen. So I just want to acknowledge those of you next door, and I know in that group are a number of students from school, so tēnā koutou whānau, I know you will enjoy Monty's talk today. Kia ora.
Tutai kei te whakaroa ke au ki te kaupapa te rā, e te kīngi, te kāhui ariki, ngā kau mātou ngā whakike o Waikato tainui, tēnā rawa tu koutou katoa. Tēnā hoki koutou o te wharewānanga nei, ngā kanohi Māori, ngā kanohi Pākehā, kua haumai nei ki roto I tēnei whare, I tēnei rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. First of all, I'd like to begin by saying it's an absolute honour and privilege to be here to speak in support of what we are celebrating, the relationship between the university and the Kīngitanga. I didn't come lightly. I respect the what is trying to be achieved here, and as I say, I'm honoured to be asked to speak today. I must say, of course, that when I was first invited, I had to think about it, because on our neck of the woods, we have some sayings. Some people in here will know them well. E hara taku maunga hikurangi te maunga neke neke, e maunga tūtonu, ko tōku kīngitanga, no te pō mai rāno. And another, ko te anake tōku kīngi, koia kei te rangi. And I won't translate those, because those people who need to know what I'm talking about. But as Professor Smith said, the invitation came after 3 to 4 months of solid research on trying to understand the Kīngitanga Waikato position during World War I. And you may know it over here, but the rest of the country do not know it. And once I'd done that research, you cannot help but sympathise and admire Waikato for the stance they took in 1914 and the principle that they stood by right through to the end of World War I. And in doing that research, I couldn't start at 1914. I had to look back 50 years earlier to appreciate why they held that view. And I learned who King Tawhiao was, his prophecies, and what his people suffered during that period. And it was that which I was thinking about when I said, yes, I would come. So timing is important. Probably any other year before this, I probably would have said no. But I have a new appreciation for the struggle that continues even today. I didn't really know who I was talking to today, and so I didn't make any notes. I thought I'd wait to see who the audience was, and this is a very diverse range, and I meet to the people who are in the other lecture room listening. So I saw young people, students coming in, and I originally thought it might be an academic audience. So having seen who's come in, I've decided to do 4 things this morning. I thought, 1, I'd tell you about what I actually do as a historian. 2, about the book I'm working on that will be published in 2017 about the First World War, Maori participation in it. And 3, I thought, especially for the young people here, I'll tell you a little bit about my life, the challenges that I've gone through, and I'll finish by giving you some tips on how I chose to overcome those challenges. I work for the Ministry for Culture and Heritage. I'm a senior historian with them. If you don't know anything about that ministry, they have a group of historians who write the government's histories. And at the moment we are working on centennial publications around World War I. World War I went from 1914 to 1918. It's about 9 books being prepared. I was given the task of writing the one on Māori participation in the First World War. And I am also with the Auckland Museum as its World War I historian in residence. I should say, put a plug in for the government, because the investment they have made in World War I, and they did this back in 2013, put millions into it. I think in that year 17 million was put up to commemorate our contribution as New Zealanders to the First World War. And rightly so. 10% of the New Zealand population were in uniform during World War I. That's over 100,000 people. There were 60,000 casualties. 18,000 died. So it's right that we should commemorate that. And I acknowledge the government for it. However, in 2013, that was also 150 years from the invasion of Waikato. And while you may have commemorated that over here, in other parts of the country, it went past silently. And I think until we are, as a nation, are able to revisit that period of our past, when we will not fully mature. To commemorate the losses in World War I, where our men and women died fighting for the liberty of other countries, and on our doorstep. And now that I'm in Waikato, right here, is a very good example of men and women who died fighting for their own country. And we mostly ignore it in our history. I've spent the last couple of days being taken around Waikato Maniapoto, and interested to see what memorials stand here to mark that period in our history. And I think on the Maori side of that story, it's almost silent except for the remains of those battles that were fought here in the Waikato. So I'm writing about World War I. And if you don't know, there were roughly 2,500 Maori who went overseas and served largely in what was called the Maori contingent, and that became the New Zealand Pioneer Battalion. But they were also in every other provincial battalion that existed in this country. The book, by the way, the title is Whitiki. And that comes from the call to arms in 1914 that was put out by the Maori MPs, Whitiki, Whiti, Whiti, e. And in the old days, that meant to put on your war belt, gird your loins with your war belt and get ready for war. And so that's the title chosen for the book. I think it's very appropriate. We found with Ngā Tamatoa when we were working on that book that a catchphrase, people seem to remember the Maori short title than they do the rest of the long title. So most of you who have seen Ngā Tamatoa probably don't know what its full title is, The Price of Citizenship. So in 2017, look for that title, Whitiki. It'll be out. It talks about the Maori experience. 500 of them were taken to Avondale and trained from every tribe in this country, even Waikato. Despite the views of the leadership here, there were one or two who, like they do today, didn't listen and went and enlisted anyhow. You know, my son is enrolling for the army, and he should be in next year. He's just turned 18. No encouragement from me. And I got him, we were watching the news one day, and we were watching what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. I said, son, in 12 months' time, that's where you'll be, fighting those people over there. That's the reality of what's going on at the moment. Just went over his head. Didn't deter him in any way. His mates have gone to the army. That's the main reason he's enlisted there. His school buddies have gone there. He knows it's a good income. He'll get to see the world. And there's privileges that come with it. And I think those young men in 1914 had the same expectation. Because in 1914, everybody thought the war, which started in August, was going to be over by Christmas. Nobody realised it was going to be a 5-year haul. So it looks at their experience in Auckland, and 500 Māori coming from different tribes who've never been put together before. It must have been really interesting for them to come together in one camp and live together. Well, I know the stories in our area about when Ngāti Porou came up against Ngāpui in Avondale, and they remembered their early history. And I'm sure it was the same for all iwi. It took them a while, some months, to meld them together into a cohesive unit who realised we are not the enemy. We have a common enemy overseas. They went off to Egypt in February 1915, and they were going there as garrison troops. Garrison troops guard stores and supplies and look after prisoners. They weren't actually being sent to fight in the front line, which disgusted them, because they were from a warrior tradition and they believed that they should do as others, their Pākehā brothers. And something else I'll explain to you about the motivation by their whakeke, and then I'll talk a little bit about what happened here. The treaty, Article 3, talks about the rights of British citizenship, but that conferred upon you with those rights are the obligations and expectations of being a citizen of this country, so that when your country goes to war, you're supposed to step up. And the Māori leaders at that time were saying, they were of the view that, well, who should step up first? The tangata whenua. They have more reason to do it. And it was under that guise that a lot of the elders agreed for their men to go off to war. And they got to Egypt and found that they weren't going to be fighting, that they were sent to the island of Malta to garrison that island, while everybody else went off to Gallipoli. The story of Māori on Gallipoli is really an untold story, unappreciated. They arrived there in July, and remember Anzac Day is when Gallipoli, well, New Zealanders and Australians first landed on Gallipoli, but it wasn't until July when high casualties were occurring that the Māori contingent of 500 men were sent there, and they were raring to go, because this was their opportunity to prove who they were, that they were equal to anybody else. And the hope was that they'd be treated that way when they came home, as equals. And so when they got the opportunity, and Chinook Bear is the battle they were involved in August 1915, they were outstanding. And the book will account for that. You know, Maori can tell you how good they were in Gallipoli, but it's the letters from Pākehā servicemen, from Australians, from British soldiers who witnessed them in action. It's the story of the 28th Maori Battalion in World War II. You see it in their fathers and their uncles in World War I, when they were told to attack at night without any rounds in a magazine but a bayonet on your rifle. So you couldn't fire a shot, go up, and if anybody who's been to Gallipoli knows what I'm talking about, go up a really, really steep terrain where the Turkish are entrenched and clear them without using shots. You had to do it all with the bayonet. The haka rang out that night on the slopes of Chunukpe, Kamate, in different places, and it was really the one successful moment in the whole of the Gallipoli campaign for New Zealanders. And it wasn't just Maori and Pākehā who went together to clear those foothills. And if anybody knows the story of Chunukpe and Malone, who got the Wellington Battalion on top there and suffered heavy casualties, and then we lost those heights. Well, in that fighting, 100 Maoris became casualties, killed or wounded. And then in the next 3 months that they were there, their numbers fell to below 100. 500 guys landed there. They were down to under 100. The rest had been taken off the island and were recovering in hospitals, either from being wounded or sick. So much so that when they left Gallipoli, you could no longer keep that unit going. And so they were reformed into a pioneer battalion. And they went to France as pioneers, and if you don't know what a pioneer is, they dig the trenches, they put down the duck walks, they widen saps, they put the roads down, but they do it all very close to the front line, and they are suffering casualties as they do that work. They thought Gallipoli was bad, but when they got to France and experienced the Somme, Messines, Flanders, that area, it was twice as bad. And throughout World War I, as I say, there were about 2,500 Māori who went across to keep that unit reinforced. And that's really what the story is about. But it's also about what happened here at home, because a unit overseas is really only the spearhead of what takes place back here. You've got to keep an army overseas. You've got to supply it from back here in New Zealand. And who did all that work back here but the women? Because their men were gone. Their menfolk were gone. The Māori population then was only 50,000. That was the time when they were smoothing the pillow of a dying race. Everybody believed that, even Māori, that it wouldn't be long before the race was exterminated through disease and things like that. So for 2,500 Māori to go out of a population of 50,000, that's pretty impressive. But you have to look below that at tribal commitment to World War I. I'll let you dwell on this photograph that some of you may be seeing for the first time. This is Te Puea in 1917. The man with her is William Tutapuaki Pitt, who was the officer, the highest ranking Māori officer at Gallipoli. He had returned home and he'd become the first president of the RSA in New Zealand, a Māori. And there's an interesting story about his daughter there, Peggy Alexandra. I don't know if any of you remember her. She lived to over 90 in Gisborne, where I am at the moment. She was born in Egypt, first Māori to be born over there, because her mother stowed away with Sir Peter Buck's wife and followed their husbands to war. Why? Well, Auntie Peggy told me it's because they didn't trust them. She was pregnant when she left, and in 1915, before they came home, she gave birth to her daughter, and Alexandria was her second name because that's the town in Egypt she was born. I don't know whether I need to educate anybody here about the Waikato position. And I'm not going to steal the thunder of Tom Law's going to be speaking about this in one of the sessions. But it was an eye-opener to me to understand why they took the position they did during the war. But you know, after studying it and examining it, it's just common sense. When you had your land stolen from you, you know, within 50 years of the war starting, when you knew people in your family who had been killed in the wars that went on around here, and then you're being asked, the children, the grandchildren of these people, to go off to fight in a war with the country you know nothing about, who have done nothing to you, you would be scratching your head about, why would I? Why would I do that? And I have some sympathy because my grandfather was living here in Waikato just before World War I. He was from Ngaitai. Ko tōna pāpa ko Pātariki Mākiwhara, ko tōna tama ko Hori. But he, because his father died, he went across to his cousin over in Ngāti Pro, Āpira Ngata, first cousins, and he worked on the farm there when the war broke out. So he ended up going with his mates from that side of the country and across to fight. I think if he was still living here, he wouldn't have gone. And so we see that if you look at the numbers of Waikato men who went in relation to other iwi, it's only a handful. The travesty is that they applied conscription to Maori in 1917, but they only applied it to this district to make an example of those in the Kīngitanga, really. And that the fact that they stood by their principles and even went to prison rather than go because they didn't believe that they should, you know, you have to admire it. And I think back now, you know, 100 years later, who was actually right? Because our people on that side of the island say we went to get equality in this country. I know that when they came back from 1918 onwards, to the Second World War, things didn't change very much in this country. Did they actually make the right call there? Because the losses for those who went are tremendous. But for those who didn't go, they're tarnished with because people don't understand, with the brush almost of conscientious objectors, when it's much deeper than that. Despite not going though, Te Puia is in this photograph in 1917 at a fundraising event for the war. That's taken at the bungalow in Waiamatitini. And this next one, that group of women on the maho of Purangi Wharenui, Waikato, assisting with the fundraising effort for the soldiers overseas. Because, as I understand it, the principle was, while our boys mightn't be over there in big numbers, we understand that in terms of defending the country, we have a part to play. And I think we romanticise sometimes because it's so long ago what actually happened back then. But you know, photographs don't lie. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm very fortunate to be doing something that I enjoy. And if you pick the right subject to write about, you get to travel a lot. So you can't write about France, Belgium and England and Gallipoli without actually going there to see the lay of the land. Which is the very reason I'm going around this area. Because how can you write about what happened here in 1914 to 1918 if you've never been here and you've never seen the places? And it's an eye-opener. I mean, I look at the country here in comparison to the East Coast, and I can see why. You know, the fertile, flat, rolling, undulating hills here compared to the hilly country that I come from. Why they would want this land before they wanted ours. We're lucky that we're so isolated, and probably farming over there wasn't going to be too effective. Right, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life. This is 15 years ago, when we were the first Maori graduates at Massey University. And I'm showing you this picture because while I might look good there, everybody masks a past that everybody has their troubles in life. So you think about what I look like there, and then I'll tell you the story of where I come from. I was born in Whakatane, where my father's from, Paro, and don't remember too much about those early years, but my life was spent between Hiruharama, where my mother's from, and near Ruatoria, and my father's people, and we lived in Kawerau and around Ruatoria for the early years of my life. At 6 years of age, I was struck down by rheumatic fever, which was going through our coast at the time. And I don't know from memory how many months I was in hospital, but it was at least 6 months into Puya Hospital. And I missed the whole of my second year education as a result at primary school. We were from our grandparents' whāngai, a lot of children. And we moved back to the coast because my grandmother had passed away, and there were all these whāngai children to be taken care of, and she went back to stay with her, look after her grandfather. Whāngai is a wonderful thing. For those who've experienced it, I have uncles and aunties. I used to wonder why I called everybody uncle and auntie, but it was real. We were connected in some way through whāngai. But it can have its negative aspects. I was abused sexually as a child, as a 6-year-old, once I came out of hospital. And I know the shame that goes with that. That, the warped mind of a 6-year-old who blames themselves for what the perpetrator did to them. And I know there are people in this hall and the next hall who know exactly what I'm talking about. At 10 years of age, my parents separated, and I was sent to live with an uncle. In Palmerston North, there was my mum's brother, he was ex-army, Korea. And so probably from those early years, I was influenced by that. The military thing. Then I was sent off to boarding school at the age of 12. Maori boys boarding school, Catholic one. We were Anglicans. Not that I knew much about what that meant. But it put you at a disadvantage. But I learned very quickly to survive in a Maori boys boarding school when you were at the bottom of the ladder, third form, and being one of the smaller guys, you had to be either quick with your tongue or learn to fight. Which, when I tried out for the army in the SAS, that what I'd been through at boarding school was no different, I thought, than trying out for the SAS. But I missed UE in the first year I sat it, and I wanted to be a teacher, so I knew I had to go get a university qualification. And then I got expelled in the second year because we'd been at boarding school too long, and my year group, we got into drinking a lot of alcohol and got caught doing it several times. And I remember what the rector said to me as he sent me on my way. He said, "You will never amount to anything in life." And that's the last words he said to me. So I left school. I remember going home to my mother, and this was the culture I grew up with. There was a party on at home, and she told me off in every swear word you could think of, but then she said, "Well, we're having some drinks inside, come and drown your sorrows." And I heard a guy at that party say, "You see that guy over there? He's just been expelled. He was an uncle of mine. He's just been expelled from school. He's on the bottom of the heap." And then he said, he qualified it, and he said, "But he'll bounce back." And I tell you that because I'm going to get to how I overcome some of these things. And what people say to you, or what you hear them say about you, is extremely important. And you need to remember this for your own children or friends that you talk to. So, rheumatic fever, missed school, abused as a child, from divorced parents, expelled from school. But 20 years after all of that happened, that's me up there in that picture. You know, how does one get from where I was to graduating with a doctorate? It took me 3 years to get a university entrance, and the only reason I got it the third year is because they brought accrediting in. And I was given it. I went off to university, and I didn't understand how universities worked. I didn't know anybody save my older brother who had just started, who had been to university, so I didn't know anybody with a degree. I didn't know what was possible. And I went there and I pretty much flunked the first year. But then, and in terms of overcoming, I started to read about people who had succeeded in life, who had had challenges. I remember reading about this woman, Romana Banuelos. She's a Mexican. And at 16, she had 2 children. Her partner had left her, and she shifted from Mexico to America with $7 in her pocket and her auntie. And she started, she bought a tortilla machine and started making Mexican food. And they started to build up a business through that. She became, in her town, you know, the biggest supplier of Mexican food. In fact, kept going until she was a millionaire. And then she got with some of the Latino business people in that area, and they created the first bank for Mexicans because they wanted to support their own people in business. And she ended up in the early 1970s becoming the 34th Treasurer of the United States under President Richard Nixon. So I looked at that and thought, wow, if you can come from that to that position, anything's possible. Another person I looked at was Apina Ngata. When he was 6 years of age, he didn't speak English until after the age of 6. He was sent off to, after primary school, he was sent off to Te Aute. And from Te Aute, as a teenager, to Canterbury University, first Maori. Can you imagine being in a university where you're the only one of your race? How challenging that must have been. But he comes out as a 20-year-old with a law degree and a bachelor's. And we know what he goes on to. In fact, in the House, when he was in Parliament, they said he spoke better English and was more educated there, more qualified than anybody else in Parliament. So I looked at those sort of things, and I read a lot about people who had succeeded, and that started to change my thinking. When I was 6, I was given these penicillin tablets to take by the doctor. And he said, you take these 3 times a day till you're 18. I took them to when I was 12, when I went to boarding school, and people asked me why I'm taking those things, so I threw them away because it was embarrassing. And I was sick of taking penicillin tablets by, all those years, 3 times a day. And I remember the doctor said to me, you won't have a full, healthy life because of the rheumatic fever got so close to your heart. But I never, ever, even though he said that to me, believed that. And, when I went to train for the SAS, they were telling me, you have to be in the top 1% of fit people in this country. That's not really true, in actual fact, mentally, you have to be in the top 1% of this country because they'll take you well past your fitness levels. But then when I got in, I thought back to that doctor. If I had listened to him and what he said to me, what he spoke over my life back then, I may never have amounted to anything in terms of things that required fitness level. There's a couple of quotes I want to leave you with. Some people might know where these come from, but one is, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The things you dwell on in your mind, if I was to believe what that doctor told me, what my rector told me when I walked out of school, that would have affected me, because eventually what you think about comes to pass if you think about it enough. If you think about positive things and what you can do in life, those things will start to appear in your life. absolutely believe that. The other thing I was talking about was the power of the tongue. Another saying is, life and death are in the power of the tongue, and those who enjoy it will eat thereof. And what that means is, whatever you say has a power of its own. And I learned not to speak over my children things like, you can't do it, or you'll never achieve that, which was said over me, because they carry that with them. Now, there's two types of people. One's me, where if you say that to me, I'll prove you wrong. And that's really what my life story has been. Every time somebody said, you can't do that, I'll go and do it. I know there's a lot of people like that. But I know too, as having coached sports teams, you can't say that to everybody, because some people will fold if you say that. That'll weaken them. But it's very important to watch what you say. We have a saying in my family that I brought my children up on, call it in. And whenever they say something negative, I'll give you a classic example. We went to Tunisia last year, and Europe. My daughter and my son were with me, and it was such a long trip to Europe or North Africa on the plane, 13 hours. And we were about to get on the plane, and we'd just done 11 hours, and it was a full plane. We're in economy, boxed in, and my daughter goes, this is going to be a terrible flight home. And my son and I looked at each other, and we said, well, not for us. We're going to have the best flight out of all the flights to and from. This is going to be the best flight for us. She knew exactly what we're talking about, because we said to her, you call that in, we're calling this in. Well, we got on this plane, and we noticed the middle row, all the way down the plane, hardly anybody sitting in there. So we're waiting for the plane to pull up. And the hostess came up to us and said, you three sitting together, once the plane's taken off, you may all move over there and have 4 seats each, and sleep the whole way. And we were over there, we were smiling at our daughter, my son and I, because we had proved to her that what you say does actually matter. And this last tip for people, because you're probably thinking, is that really all that has been to his life that changed it? I had the only thing I can describe this as is a supernatural, I suppose a supernatural, not a meeting, but supernaturally influenced by the God of our forefathers. And some of you in here who are spiritual know what I'm talking about. You know, all Maori generally are spiritual. You just got to press the right button with them. You think about it. Every hui, we start with a prayer, we end with a prayer. Boarding school, we did everything. All credit to Catholics. Start everything with a prayer and finish with a prayer. And you don't think much about it at the time. But when something happens to you that makes you realize that no, there is a God. It's real, and that nobody can change your mind about that. Well, that's what happened to me. And I realized that all these prayers we do, and we start with a prayer, end with a prayer, there's actually something to it. And that's another reason why I admire the Waikato story. When I looked at Tawhia and Te Puea and the spiritualness of those people that carries right through to today, that really is the secret to my life. Despite all the tips I'm giving you, that changed my life. And it's enabled me to talk about these things publicly, where most people would be challenged to do so. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Monty, for sharing much more than a story of World War I. And I think that was a powerful sharing with us. But in a way, to me, the story of your personal life and the story of why Maori would have engaged in World War I do kind of parallel each other in the sense of the context in which we are called to be, whatever era, whether we're called to fight in a war overseas or our era now, where we are also called to be courageous. We're called to care over and above our usual caring for our culture and our people. And so I thank you for sharing with us today. Once again, I think it's a great start to Kīngitanga Day, a connection, if you like, with what you've been doing over the last few months with the particular story of Waikato Tainui and World War I, but linking it very much to 2015 and our story now. And I guess, for Maori, the point you made about, the 100 years of fighting for our own land, and then the role, in a sense, there's a saying that the victors always get to tell the stories. And the interesting thing with us, sometimes, it always makes me laugh, that even when we technically might have lost, morally we won. And we won morally because to fight for your land is morally correct. That's why we have the sense of doing what we should do. Doing what we should do. And I think we still need to do that. So please join me in thanking our keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Monty Suter.